r/AskReddit by Reddit tells. Divorce lawyers of Reddit. What's the most screwed you've seen someone? I used to be a divorce lawyer, but it was not something I was proud of. Plus the partner I worked for was such an asshole. I was the 11th associate that worked for her in 10 years. We used to go through 2 to 3 secretaries a year. Couple screwed up cases I remember. Our client and his wife were Mormon. During the divorce she used to tell him that he had to give her what she wanted in the divorce because they were sealed in the church and would be spending eternity together. We had to fight him not to give her more than she deserved. Represented the wife of a minor celebrity and said celebrity would file for divorce regularly when she acted up. Once he determined she was behaving as he liked, he's cancelled the divorce. Rotten bastard. My mother divorced my dad when I was like 2 years old. They had bought a house together and my dad's family offered her fair value to buy the house from her. She denied the offer and puts it up for sale publicly. My dad's family buys it for 40% less than what they offered my mom on a public bidding auction. I've worked as a legal assistant for 2 family law attorneys for the last 8 years. One of the cases that made me the angriest was a man who cheated on his wife when she had cancer. He then leaves his wife and attempts to hide all his assets while she's undergoing chemotherapy. Fortunately, my boss is a badass. She teamed up with a forensic accountant and they took him to the cleaners. He even had to pay the forensic accountant's bill and attorney's fees. I met a girl in college who was not incredibly bright and was suddenly in a blind panic to make money. The reason was she had been kicked out of the place she was staying and needed emergency money. She had been kicked out because she was living with her boyfriend in his house while his wife was in the hospital due to brain cancer. So when she came home, still very much not likely to live long, he booted this 19-year-old out of his house with a "you can move back in when she dies." His wife beat cancer, came home, was receiving mail for a strange name and eventually tracked her down on Facebook. From there she found out that her 47-year-old husband had been dating a 19-year-old for just over a year, officially likely actually longer, and put him through the ringer. One of my father's friends tried to solve the earth before getting divorced. A rental house and a cabin were deeded to relatives. The cars they drove every day were sold to other relatives for tiny sums. Stocks handed over to a trust for the children, etc. He even vanished a chunk of cash from the company he co-owned with his wife using funny invoices and stopped paying himself a salary, electing to burn through their personal savings for over a year instead. He learned that judges really hate when you try to hide or intentionally diminish assets, and they will absolutely refer you to prosecutors for fraud. I don't think he did any jail time in the end, but his ex-wife got everything, plus the satisfaction of firing him from his own company. I'm not a divorce lawyer, but we once went to our open court with uni, and it was a divorce case. Our whole class was there watching them get divorced. It was a Dutch business guy and his Eastern European wife. She was talking about how he forced her to do anal and BDSM against her will and shit. Their children were also there watching, and I remember feeling so bad for the kids. They were like 12/15, and not only did they have to watch their parents divorce, they had to hear about their father's fetishes that he forced on their mother, while an entire class of uni students was watching along gasping like we were watching a fucking movie. The lady was crying while she was talking about all his fetishes that she absolutely hated. Judge asked if he ever was violent, and she said he slapped me on my face and ass, but only during sex, but I didn't want it. I remember seeing their 15-year-old daughter, completely red face and eyes filled with tears that she tried to hold in. Looked like she wanted to bury her head into the sand. Felt so terrible for that girl. Meanwhile, the girl next to me kept pushing her leg against mine every time this lady spoke a word, like "OMG, did you hear that shit?" My favorite divorce story of all time. My buddy meets girl, gets married, la-dee-da. 6 months later, she runs off with another dude. After a couple months, my buddy filed for divorce. He told her, "Listen, we've been married 6 months. Let's do an uncontested divorce, since you haven't worked or anything, and I own everything, and did before I met you." She puts up a fight and eventually comes to, "I had a car coming into this marriage, and I'm leaving with one." She sold her car for some dumb shit. He offers her the truck, 10 years old with 150k miles, but meticulously maintained. She said nope, so off to court they go. She got zip, nada, empty-handed. My favorite justice boner of all time. I offered my ex 6 figures in stock, literally more than half of what I had aside from my house, which I bought before marriage. He thought he deserved twice that, and dragged the divorce out for a year. Our marriage was only 2.5 years, so the nonsensical divorce lasted basically half, as long as the marriage. The judge awarded him half of what I offered him, but in cash. We made it all the way to trial with no kids, and not really any assets to divide, so the judge could not understand why we were there. We were only there because my ex wanted me to pay him an amount of money I literally didn't have, and he had the most incompetent attorney who harassed both myself and my parents throughout the process. If he had taken my original offer and not been a complete narcissistic prick, he would have basically had what he demanded originally because the stock accrued value. I warned him that he wasn't entitled to as much when I begged him to take the offer and not put us through hell. It was pretty crazy. What ruined my justice boner is that my lawyer got the other half and then some. I also told my ex I would have rather have paid him over attorneys, but he's a dummy and always made terrible decisions. He consistently proved why I was divorcing him throughout the divorce. My wife's ex-husband tried this regarding child support. They agreed to work on a payment outside the court system because it would save both parties money. He told her he could afford $200 a month, maybe $250 a month, but that would be the absolute most he could do. She felt that was a little low, but told him to let her think it over and she would get back to him. He then spent the next several days asking her if the $200 figure would work because he knew someone who would type it up and then they could both sign. Ended up finding the state guidelines for calculating child support payments and plugging in all the numbers said his payment should be $800-850. She countered with asking for $400 because we didn't need the full amount to take care of the kiddo, buy him things he needs on top of doing fun things. Dude outright refused and said there was no way he could afford that much because it would impact his lifestyle too much. She pointed out he was offering less than a quarter of what testate said was the minimum amount he should be paying. Dude still refused. So then we had to get the legal system involved. Lawyers were hired, numbers were discussed in mediation and still he refused to budge. He was told by the mediator, if this goes to court the judge isn't going to care if it impacts your lifestyle. Mediation failed. A court date was scheduled. The date arrives, and he walks in with a brand new lawyer. The hearing got pushed because the new lawyer didn't have time to prepare for the case properly, having been hired like 2 days prior. Next court date they tried to bypass the custody hearing by pushing for a change in custody. That fell through because it was based on him having a picture of my wife standing by a mutual friend of ours. Next court date he walked in with a third lawyer and the date got pushed again. Rinse and repeat shit like that for 8 months before finally a hearing was held. It lasted long enough for the judge to look at the numbers involved. She set his child support at the 800 plus figure and that was the end of things. It was the most ridiculous petty thing ever. He ended up paying over twice what my wife was asking for and managed to rack up thousands in legal fees. On my year abroad in the US I took a domestic relations class ran by an ex-judge who told us a few good ones. The first one was a couple who gathered their entire stuffed toy collection and split them in court, each taking turns to pick. He said they weren't even collectibles, a lot of cheap ones you'd get at the fair. My favorite is where both parties were both being unreasonable and not thinking of the kids. In the end he awarded the house to the kids, who would permanently live there, and the parents who had joined custody would take it in turns to live there. His argument was that the kids' lives should take priority. Best thing was neither party could afford to buy an additional place on their own, so the couple had to rent a small flat together and also share that. Pretty badass judge in my opinion. I represented a woman whose husband had attacked her with what was essentially a broomstick, but instead of a broom at the end there was a metal scrub brush. When the time came for trial, I figured the other attorney, an old professor of mine, was going to ask for and get a continuance. Why? because there were pending criminal charges for the assault, and the guy can't just remain silent in civil court as he can in criminal court. If you refuse to answer a question in civil court, the court can take a negative inference against you. When the husband's lawyer and I were talking prior to the hearing, he told me he was going to have the hearing today unless I was willing to drop the alimony claim. I think he took my questioning him if he wanted a continuance as an indication that I was unprepared. Since I wasn't, I told him I was going to have the hearing and that his client was going to be my first witness. Husband's attorney said his client would please the fifth, and I told him the chancellor, judge, would take a negative inference if he did. Husband's attorney said, the chancellor will do what the chancellor will do, clearly trying to intimidate me into backing down on alimony. So when the hearing starts, husband's attorney is looking a little miffed that I'm still pushing for alimony, and at this point I have an assistant bring in the broken weapon used to attack my client. The wooden handle stood propped next to my desk and the scrub brush lay on it. I called husband as my first witness. Husband's attorney jumps up and objects that this is improper and that I have to call my client first. I tell the chancellor I'll respond when he cites a rule. There is no such rule in this court. The chancellor smiled, turned to husband's attorney, and asks him which rule he's referring to. He withdraws his objection and then says his client is pleading the fifth. I respond that this is fine, but that his client still needs to take the stand, so he can invoke that on each individual question he doesn't want to answer, so the court knows where to take a negative inference against him. The chancellor sides with me, and husband takes the stand. So after my warm-up questions, I ask husband what happened on X date, the night of the assault. He contends wife had driven donuts in the yard he had been working on, and that she then got out of the car and started swearing at him. Me, that made you angry, didn't it? Him, it was disrespectful. Me, that made you angry, didn't it? Him, it would have made anyone angry. Me, slow enough that it sounds like I'm talking to a foreign toddler. That, ma, d, you, and gry, didn't it? Him, it sure as hell did. Chancellor, if you swear again in this courtroom I'll have you arrested. Me, you said she was disrespectful and her actions would have made anyone angry, right? Him, yes. Me, you didn't just take that lying down, did you? Here's where I'm figuring he'll plead the fifth, and I'll get my negative inference and move on. But before his lawyer can jump up to do so, husband answers. Him, of course not, I hit her. Me, you didn't hit her with your hands, did you? Him, no, I hit her with that stick you got over there. He actually pointed at it. Me, you hit her more than once, didn't you? Him, I hit her until she got the point. Probably 3 or 4 times. His lawyer is literally facepalming at this point. Me, you hit her hard enough that the end broke off, didn't you? I'm holding up the metal scrubber. Him, turning to his lawyer, is this where I'm supposed to say I don't want to answer cause my criminal case? Needless to say, my client got her alimony. Edited for formatting. Thanks for watching. Please like the video, comment with your own lawyer stories, subscribe to the channel for more.